Well, hello everyone out there. Welcome to another Soothkeep live stream. If you have good audio and video, please give me 2 thumbs up. If you have excellent video and audio, give me 3 thumbs up. I'm in a hotel room, as you can probably see from the picture. We're on the road. We are in Salina, Kansas. If any of you have read my Planet Shaken series, you'll recognize the town of Salina, Kansas. So I'd just like to offer right now, if whoever can first put it in the chat, if you can tell me the significance of Salina, Kansas, and then give me, I will send you an autographed copy of The Rogue. Just tell me what volume Salina, Kansas first appeared in, and what character was associated with it, and the significance of it. So, at any rate, um, if you go ahead and put it in there, then we will get connected with you, get your address, and we will mail you a copy. All right, we got lots of thumbs up. Fantastic. So let me pull up my notes here, and let's just get into the live stream tonight. I already told you that we're on the road. We're going to be on the road for about a month. It's going to end with the Prophecy Watcher Conference in Branson, Missouri, and then on to Dallas for the Pre-Trib Study Group Conference, where I'm going to network with some of my friends. And then we're going to be in Lufkin, Texas, with Pastor Jeff Belts, and we are going to have 1 or 2 meetings in his Baptist church there. Then we're going to head for home. That'll be about mid-December. In the meantime, I'm on the road. I'm trying to keep writing, trying to keep up with my videos. It's a little bit on the hectic side, so please pray for me in that. And I am making some really good ground on my Pre-Wrath Rapture book. I had hoped to have it done last summer. I was hoping to have it done by this winter. It's not going to happen, but now I'm shooting for the Orlando conference in March. We'll see what happens. All right, someone says we got a great internet connection. Fantastic. I paid for the upgrade at the Hampton Hotel, which is, I think, is worthwhile paying for that. I'm going to slide my notes over just a little bit so I can see the chat while we're working here. Seems kind of funny when I use my laptop. I don't have 2 screens where I have one screen with my notes and one screen I can see what's going on with the chat room and with the video camera. So right now my whole video camera stuff is covered up with my notes, but that's just the way it goes. Well, let's get into the subject tonight. In some ways, this is a painful subject to have to address. We've got a big controversy brewing here. It's affected many, many people across the land right now. Many pastors, many prophecy teachers are frustrated. In this controversy comes down to what should be the pastor's view on President-elect Trump, and what should be the pastor's position on stumping for Trump, or should he stump for Trump? And we also going to look at what should be our view on voting. I mean, is there really elections, or is there only selections and we're wasting our time? So we're going to look at this. I do want to put some helpful context on this, folks. I empathize with those who grieve whenever there's a controversy comes up, and 2 brothers or groups of churches are going at it, wrangling over a point, and I get it. Nobody loves controversy. You'd have to be a knothead and have a bad heart to seek controversy. But there is a time and a place to stand for truth, to stand for righteousness, and to defend our brothers in the Lord. And it's never pleasant, but it's absolutely necessary. We just want to make sure that when we stand for issues, we're standing for something that's worth standing for. That when we stand for that issue, that we're really being fair to the different parties that are involved. And that we want to make sure that we're not caving into gaslighting. Now, it is in my mind, and probably in yours, it's grievous when men draw disciples unto themselves, away from the general testimony of the church, away from the general testimony of the conservative evangelicals, the conservative, consistent evangelicals. We don't like to see that. It's a frustrating, and we're all going to feel the pain. We're going to feel the sorrow. Nobody likes division. But there is a silver lining in this, and if we can see the silver lining, it really helps when we're dealing with controversy. The silver lining is found in 1 Corinthians 11:19. Now, this probably isn't the only passage that provides a silver lining to controversy, but it's my favorite one that does. Well, there we read, "For there must also be factions among you, that those who are approved may be recognized among you." In other words, if we don't have controversies in the church, then there's nothing to stand for, there's nothing to be right on. But if there is something to stand for, and if there is issues where men are either going to be right or wrong, then in the midst of all that controversy, some are going to be standing for the truth, and some will be standing for error. There's dozens of these. On a large scale, on a smaller scale, there's hundreds and hundreds of them. Now, in glory, we're going to discover that in all the divided body of Christ, in the midst of all these painful controversies and divisions, there will be people who stood for the truth with the meekness of Christ on every issue, and they will be rewarded for it. Now, I don't think any individual is going to be found to be right on every issue, period. It's really hard to be right on just the main issues. Most of the body of Christ is going to be wrong on some of the main issues. Thankfully, we're not saved because we get our doctrinal statement correct. Thankfully, we're saved because we believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. We trust that he's the only way of salvation, that his atoning work on the cross, his blood that he shed, his blood that's on the altar in heaven today is the only way of salvation. So when we come to these controversies, obviously they're painful, but embrace them as a teaching moment. If it's a teaching moment you're not interested in, then move on and find another controversy that you are interested in and use it for a teaching moment. Nobody's got the time to investigate every controversy. It's not possible. But we all have time and interest to investigate some of them. So when we go into these controversies, keep your eyes open and weigh both sides and look for the right answer. But not only look for the right answer, but look for an answer that's balanced. It's in a harmonious context that harmonizes with the entire body of the faith, that harmonizes with not only the doctrinal aspect of faith, but the practical side too, like love and grace and mercy. And, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about in this controversy is love covers a multitude of sin. Now, we don't want to use that so that we're excusing gross rebellion. We don't want to use that to excuse when people are intentionally backsliding. But there are times when it's a very practical benefit to the body of Christ. We don't all have correct understanding. We're not all at the same place of our growth curve. And we want to make sure that when we're dealing with people who don't have our discernment, that we're gracious with them. We can't be candling everybody we meet by our doctrinal perspective, particularly if we're 20, 30 years ahead of them, or by our discernment, particularly if we're many years ahead of them in the breadth and depth and scope of our investigations and our discernment. So we want to go about this with a gentle, tender spirit. Now, before we go into what the controversy is that we're talking about, let's start by pointing out a few things that the controversy is not. So obviously this controversy is we're talking about President-elect Trump and about pastors and their relationship with Trump and about our discernment of the whole big picture. And I just want to point out that this controversy is not two YouTube preachers in a personality conflict. If we have conflicts going on that level, folks, just walk away. That's not a controversy worth having. You know, last summer and the summer before that, when I was involved in a few controversies that I didn't like being in them, but I felt an obligation to be in them, controversies on the whole date setting stuff and whether the imminent rapture was involved high watch times or whether imminence is actually opposed to high watch times. And of course, people would want to get all frustrated over this whole thing, and they would say, well, this is a personality conflict. You and brother so-and-so is just having an argument or a debate. Well, no. I mean, I'm sure some people would feel I was attacking their favorite preacher, whoever that might be. There's a couple dozen of people who have some useful YouTube channels who do the high watch times, and they all preach the gospel. I think they're godly people. I hope I'm not wrong in that. And I think they're doing a useful work for the Lord. But on that particular point, I think they're hindering the work of the Lord rather than helping. But I wasn't addressing any particular individual. I was addressing a problem in a general way. And people would get angry and say, you're attacking a brother. Well, I'm not attacking a brother. And it wasn't a personality conflict, at least not on my part. And we don't want these things to be personality conflicts. Personality conflicts hurt the work of the Lord. They don't help it. Now, the second thing I want to point out is this isn't a disagreement with someone's discernment on President-elect Trump, where he's at, what his trajectory is, his relationship to the New World Order, and whether or not we should have voted for him. Now, that's really not the core thing that we're looking at here tonight. It's not that that's not involved, but that's not the core point. Personally, I share the concerns that Trump is, his platform, I'm wary of it. His associations, I'm wary of them. His trajectory, I'm wary of them. I mean, personally, I feel that we could well be looking at the replacement of the hard left Marxist version of the New World Order with an America First centrist version of the New World Order. Of course, if this is what's really going on, this would be a tremendous Hegelian synthesis, wouldn't it? It would be very subtle. It would catch a lot of people unawares. And that's my view. But I do want to point out, folks, this is not Bible doctrine. I hold this view, but this is my connecting of the dots of extra biblical research and extra biblical investigation. I've connected those dots. Now they connect to the Bible, but it's not Bible teaching in and of itself. And my discernment could be wrong. Now I don't think it's wrong, but none of us are 100% correct 100% of the time with this kind of discernment. It just doesn't happen. The best investors in the world who make billions of dollars in the stock markets and the commodities markets and the real estate markets, they're right 30 to 40% of the time max. It's really, really rare to find someone who's right 50% of the time. But you don't have to be right more than 30, 40% of the time to become a billionaire in the markets. If you hit 350 in Major League Baseball, you're a superstar, at least as long as you have some abilities to handle the ball on the field, whether in the infield or the outfield, or as a catcher or a pitcher. But it's the same way here when it comes to this class of discernment stuff. We're not going to be right most of the time. Maybe a few are going to be right most of the time, but in general, we're not going to be. This is always a learning process. So the last thing I want to point out is that this is not about defending the comments of a few preachers who made remarks that many feel are over the top when it comes to insisting that people in their congregations and Christians in general vote for Trump. Now, like I said, I'm not going to defend that. I haven't investigated most of that. I have no intention to investigate most of that, and I have a reason for that. Whenever we deal with a set of information on a subject, all the data points, typically how you deal with that, all that bunch of data, if you got a few outliers, you throw the outliers out because they're outliers. You don't deal with those. You deal with the massive body of information that's got a pattern in your data set. And that's the same way when we deal not just with math problems, but with psychology problems and with theological problems. So you have a few outliers. All that proves is that a few people were over the top. What I'm interested in is, what is the general consensus of dispensational pastors and dispensational prophecy teachers? What's their general consensus on the relationship between the believer and the election, between the believers and their relationship to Trump and what they think about him? So that's where we're going to look tonight. Now, I do want to say, let me review these 3 points real quickly. This is not a personality conflict, at least it shouldn't be. This isn't a disagreement with somebody's discernment on Trump, because it just isn't. And this isn't about defending a few people whose remarks are regarded as over the top. I'm not going to defend their over the top remarks. What this is about is that we have a situation where dispensational pastors and dispensational prophecy teachers in general are accused of having compromise in their testimony. And we are going to look in that. So that's the core issue. Now, I'm not going to trot out a whole bunch of examples. We don't need to do that. I just want to bring out a few examples and then move on to other points that are critical to the subject. We just need a few to illustrate the problem. And if we look at the problem, then we can look at our own situation in our own relationship to this bigger picture and use it for a teaching point, use it for a teaching moment. So here's the point. I'm going to give you a few thoughts that I took from a video called The Now Religion. And one of these said, when your pastor gets up there and pumps Trump, he is giving a blessing for abortion. I found that just shortly after minute 32. Now, what percentage of dispensational pastors does this affect? Well, folks, a very high percentage, maybe 95% of them. Certainly the vast majority of them. Now, is this a legitimate critique? Is this true? Is it true that if a pastor was encouraging people to vote for Trump, that he was giving a blessing for abortion? Now, I want you to think about this. On this question here, you're not just giving account to me, or to your little circle of friends who either agree with you or disagree with you. You're going to stand before the Lord Jesus Christ at the judgment seat of Christ. He's going to look you in the eyes, and it's going to come down to two things. Is this a fair assessment of what was in that pastor's heart? And is this the right interpretation of the situation? Personally, I think it's a very wrong interpretation. I would tremble to stand before Jesus at the judgment seat of Christ and have held this position and regarded that everyone that encouraged people to vote for Trump was actually promoting abortion. There is a better interpretation available. Now, I'm sure that you probably heard of Occam's razor, or in modern terminology, we call it the elegant solution. That's where you find the simplest solution that matches all the data, and you run with that one. This is part of the scientific method, and it's a tremendous blessing. So when a corollary of this is when we're looking at a situation like this, we pick the interpretation of the situation, which is the less damning. If we can put someone in less dark light rather than blacker light, or if we can put him in good light rather than black light, we have a moral obligation to do so. This is really part of love covers a multitude of sin, but it also, even beyond that, is love imputes no evil. If a pastor was defending voting for Trump because he honestly believed that Trump was a much better president for America than Kamala was, and that Trump was going to offer more blessings for the church than Kamala would have, then it would be, and they were voting for Trump because they believed that by voting for him, they were going to have fewer abortions in America per year. Now, it doesn't really matter if you have statistics that you think proves that that's illegitimate. Well, that's another thing. But we're talking here what was in their heart, what data they were looking at, what facts they were looking at that they drew that conclusion from. Now, personally, I fit in this category. I'm not ashamed to say that I voted for Trump. And I didn't vote for Trump because I thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Maybe some people do. Certainly some people within Christendom think that. But I voted for Trump because I was convinced that he was going to be good for America on some points, and on other points he was better, way better than the option. Now, when we come to a question like this, folks, we have to realize that we have to vote like pilgrims and strangers. We are pilgrims and strangers in this world. We don't belong to this world. We have not been given a commission to fix this world. We're not postmillennialists. We're not new apostolic restoration. We're not here to bring the world to zero abortions. That's not the job that we've been given. We've been given a job to preach the moral position of the Bible as hard as we can, as far as we can, as wide as we can, with the gospel right at the foundation and the heart of that message. And we present this message to the world. And we push it through every open door we get, whether we get open doors in the business world, whether we get open doors in the sports world, whether we get open doors in the music world, in the political world, in the media world, wherever the Lord gives us open doors, in big towns, in small towns, in rural neighborhoods, and farm communities. We push the truth of the living God. We push the gospel. We push the moral standards. We push the righteousness of God. We push the coming prophecies of God. We push the history of the Bible. And we try and get people to be awakened and converted. And we try and influence people as far as we can by the message of the Bible. Now, we're not obligated to clean this world up, but we are obligated to shine as much light as we can, as far as we can, as bright as we can, until the rapture trumpet sounds. And when we go forth as evangelicals, and many of us, our work is going to be touching on the political realm, at least occasionally. With some, it's frequently. We encourage as much as we can. But because we are not New Apostolic Reformation, because we're not post-millennialists, we're premillennialists, we understand that we're not here to fix the world. We're here to be salt and light in the world. We're here to preach the gospel and hold up the truth of God. We know that there's never such a thing as an ideal presidential candidate that has a ghost of a chance to actually win an election. If we're going to vote, we are always voting for the lesser of two evils. Now, sometimes some of them are relatively bright from an America level. There's usually not a lot of light from a purely biblical level. We have to keep these two things separate. When we're voting as pilgrims. We're voting for the solution that's pragmatically the best. When I vote, I'm a one-issue voter. I'm voting for which candidate is going to give the Christian church the most freedom for the next 4 years. That's going to involve a combination of things, primarily freedom to preach the gospel, freedom to preach the truth, freedom from persecution, from weaponized government agencies, freedom to have economic freedom, freedom for the work of the Lord to expand and grow. That's what I vote for. Now, just so happens, historically speaking, when we vote for that issue, we end up also voting typically for the biggest chunk of righteousness and morality that is available that's realistic. Now, typically, at least in recent decades, in election cycles, there's a candidate or two that's a true blue, absolutely solid, rock solid conservative, or a true blue, real born-again Christian with some seriously amazing biblical standards. But folks, we are not in a New Apostolic Reformation world. We are not in a post-millennial world. These candidates have 0% chance of succeeding, not merely because there's not enough of us to vote him in, but because that's not God's plan for the world. He has no plan to convert the world through the church, or to Christianize the world through the church. That's not his plan. His plan is to call men out of the world unto Christ, to join the rejected, crucified Christ in a wilderness testimony. And he's called the church to be salt and light as much as we can, as far as we can, as long as we can, with all the strength that we can muster until that rapture trumpet blows. So when we vote, we are voting, or we should be voting, pragmatically for the candidate that's a realistic candidate, that has a realistic chances of winning. Vote for the candidate that's going to help us the most for the next 4 years. We don't want to be voting idealistically. That would be our obligation if we were New Apostolic Reformation or post-millennial. We're dispensationalists, folks. We're pilgrim journeying through this world. We need to vote like pilgrims journeying through this world. At any rate, let me move on. Whoops, I accidentally messed up with my notes. Back to this point. I just think it's wrong. If your pastor pumps Trump, he's giving a blessing for abortion. I don't believe that for 1 minute. I believe that's slander. Now, I can't say that this was intentional slander out of a bad heart, that would be wrong. I don't know that. And I think it would probably be wrong for people to accuse this brother of that. I think this brother is sincere. I think he has good intentions. He wants to see the truth going forth for the people of God. But this is a mistake in discernment. It's a mistake in discretion. It's a mistake in judgment. So here's another one. In the same video, this started around 1 hour and 11 minutes. When someone says, I'm standing for righteousness by voting for a baby killer, you're lying to yourself, period, no matter how you try to justify it. Then I skipped a little bit, and here's another line. You are throwing yourself behind someone who is for abortion, who is for the alphabet agenda, and who is in favor of dividing Israel. If you feel led to vote for him, do it. But just stop saying that you are standing for righteousness, because you are not. We need to stop that lie. Well, again, are you comfortable with such statements? I'm personally not comfortable with them. I don't know a single dispensational pastor or Bible teacher that's comfortable with such statements. They're harsh. They don't rightly reflect the opinions of the dispensational pastors and Bible teachers. First of all, nobody says when they're voting, I'm going to go vote for a baby killer. I mean, that might be in the heart of someone who's voting for the other side of the aisle, but that's not in the heart of those that voted for Trump. And you have to make a distinction, as I tried to mention earlier, between our Christian testimony for righteousness, where there's no compromise on that. We preach that from the pulpit. We preach it in our Bible studies. We preach it around the coffee table. We preach it to family and friends and neighbors and acquaintances. We preach it to the world without compromise. We tell them what the Bible says. And it's never right to compromise that message. But there's a distinction between our clear Christian testimony and then our political efforts, because we're not NAR, we're not post-millennial, we don't have a commission to clean this world up. We have a commission to be salt and light as far as we can. So when we have a choice between a candidate who's going to burn the country down with abortion and one whose position is going to bring less abortions, or at least that's what it appears to be to most people that have looked at the platform, then you see that you're going to vote for the lesser of two evils. Now, I went into this election fully aware of the abortion pill problem. I went into this election fully aware of the short-term abortion problem, like within the first 3 months. I went into this election knowing full well that throwing the issue back on the states wasn't a perfect solution, although it was in some ways a relatively well, for a short-term fix, it had its benefits. I went into this election knowing full well that he favored a two-state solution. But that doesn't guarantee that he's going to bring forth a two-state solution in the next 4 years. That definitely seems to be the direction that he would like to go. But this is qualified, folks. When you start reading other things he said on the subject, you realize that this is going to be a two-state solution that is actually beneficial to Israel, even though it's throwing a bone to the Palestinians. For this side of the kingdom, it's a relatively good deal. We know what they're going to get in the kingdom. And Folks, this side of the kingdom, there is nothing ideal in the political realm. There is nothing ideal in the political realm. In fact, there's nothing ideal in the church. So we want to be careful about being frustrated over solutions that are not ideal. I went into the election knowing the shortcomings. I voted for him intentionally. I honestly believed that he was the best bet for America. And to be honest, I honestly believed that voting for an ideal candidate was actually not a good idea. It's voting like your post-millennial or new apostolic reformation rather than voting like a dispensationalist. And I voted, in fact, voting for choosing not to vote. I encourage people not to go that route, simply because when you were looking at what's coming down the pike, if Kamala Harris was in office and the Democrats had another run at it, it looked like an immediate existential threat to the church. Now, I know that some of you operate from the assumption, and I can work with you on it, that there are no elections, there's only selections. And there are some things about that position that make sense. But I don't believe it's absolutely true. I believe that the global cabal would like to have that kind of control. I believe that they're intentionally interfering with elections. But I don't believe that they have entirely stopped, at least not in America, entirely stopped the election process. I could be wrong, but this is just my view. This is my approach. This is my discernment. This is how I connect the dots. And this is how most dispensational pastors and Bible teachers connect the dots. So because this is a matter of discernment, because it's a matter of connecting the dots, I'd like to encourage you not to try and judge their character on the basis of how they connected the dots and that they've connected them different than you do. Obviously, if you think that we don't have elections, we have selections and voting is a waste of time, then you're not going to vote. And okay, I can honor that. I think it's a mistake, but I honor that. Some good people believe that. Some of my dearest friends on earth believe that. But on the other hand, going the other way, most of the dispensational camp believes that we do have a say yet in America. And we're convinced that the global cabal wants to stop that in America and bring it to an end. And we're not going to let it happen. It's the spirit that I feel here. Just walk with me for a moment in this and just not trying to convince you right now, just giving you some food for thought. I'm frustrated. Now, Calvinism in and of itself is a small offense to me. I'm not a Calvinist. But some of the best men on the planet are Calvinists. Some of the brightest minds in the dispensational camp are Calvinists. But there is a kind of Calvinism that frustrates me to no end, and that's the kind of Calvinism that says we don't have to be involved in evangelism or hard work for the things of God because God is sovereign. He's going to do whatever he wants, and he doesn't need our help. Well, when you come down to this point of we believe there's no elections, only selections, and there's what's basically not worth our time trying to be salt and light in a lot of the arenas of America. We'll just preach the gospel to our neighbors and our family and friends, and much of the rest of the country there's nothing we can do. It's all an elections, not a selection. Well, if you go down that path, you can see the correlation. If you believe that, you're not going to be vigorously manifesting salt and light. And so I just want to get so that if you're coming from the perspective of there's no elections, there's only selections. If that's the ground you're on, at least try and walk in the shoes of those that are not on that ground. Try and empathize with them. Try and understand where they're coming from. And that's the majority position in dispensationalism. So personally, when we come to these statements like, when someone says I'm standing for righteousness by voting for a baby killer, you're lying to yourself, period, no matter how much you try and justify it. I'm just not comfortable with statements like that. It bothers me that anybody could be comfortable with statements like that. I don't think that this is a fair representation of your typical dispensational pastor or your typical dispensational prophecy teacher. I mean, how many dispensationalists who voted for Trump voted on that kind of ground? Well, it would be the most of them. And are you comfortable believing that most dispensationalists are lying to themselves? I'm personally, on something this big, I'm just not comfortable taking that ground. Whoops, I moved my notes again. Hang on, here we go. I think that this is misframing the situation. As I mentioned before, I'll mention it again. We need to make a distinction between the believer's stand for biblical morality. This is universal. It's absolute. There's no room for compromise ever. This is our testimony as a believer. But we need to make a distinction between that ground and the believer's pragmatic dealings as a pilgrim in the political process. We take what we can get to give us more freedom and to bring the most righteousness as we can in society around us. There's never an ideal solution. There never will be an ideal solution that's workable until the kingdom. In the meantime, if we can slow abortion, we slow it. If we can stop it in some arenas, we stop it. If there's some states that are going to have no abortion, we'll take it. If there's some states that can't be brought that far and they can be brought to abortions are allowed for up to 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever they're going to allow under certain conditions, well, it's not ideal, but we'll take it. I'd rather take that than unrestricted abortion on demand in all 50 states. And abortion right up until the moment of birth. I mean, folks, we live in a pagan world, and it's going to be pagan. We can't stop it from being pagan. In fact, we're in the midst of a revival of paganism that's overtaking the church. So if we can understand that we have a salt and light testimony as pilgrims, and we have that obligation in the political arena, the media, the sports arena, wherever we're mingling, then we just spread it as much as we can, take what we can get, and keep moving on. Because we're not going to clean the world. We're not going to fix the world. And it's foolish to try and be idealistic on this. Now, we should be consistent in our testimony. But in the political realm, that's not our job, except for salt and light. Now, I've mentioned this before. I'll say it one more time before I move on. If we're going to vote like a discerning pilgrim, assuming that we're not absolutely convinced, obviously, that there's no elections, only selections, because if we believe that, we're not going to vote. But if we believe that the vote can make a difference, then we want to use that vote in a way that actually can make a difference in the world. We're not voting from some idealistic standard. At least I don't. If you vote for an ideal candidate who has no realistic chance of winning, then I think that that's a wasted vote. And if you choose not to vote, well, both of these are like voting for the other person. Now, I'm not gonna really work this over on you real hard. I just want you to think about this and chew through this and meditate on this. obviously every believer has to stand and fall to the Lord. They don't stand and fall to me or to any dispensational preacher. But I think this is a realistic perspective. I think it merits consideration. At any rate, personally, I'm not ashamed of standing on the ground of voting for the candidate that's the lesser of two evils. And there isn't a man on the planet that can make me ashamed of that process. You can accuse me all you want of voting for abortion, and I'm going to laugh in your face because it's simply not true. And I'm going to wonder how in the world you could think that way. But anyway, let's move on. I'd mentioned that we don't want to put a black or dark or negative interpretation on a pastor's position if there is one that's actually noble or just or righteous that's available. And this is really a corollary of Occam's razor. I think it's wrong, folks, to claim that Trump voters are voting for abortion when we have the option available to regard them as voting for less abortions and harder abortion options and fewer abortion options. Now, isn't it realistic to look at it from this perspective that's what they were attempting to do? Personally, when I look at all the dispensational pastors and the dispensational Bible teachers that I know, I don't know a single one that didn't have some reservations about Trump. I don't know a single one that was hardcore, blind to Trump's faults, and just on the Trump bandwagon for all he's worth. Now, some of them stumped pretty hard for Trump. There's no doubt about it. But it was stumping for Trump because the other option was unbearable. In America, under 4 more years of Obama, Obama under Kamala, I don't think so. To me, that was a real existential threat to evangelicalism in America. At any rate, let's move on. I've worked that point good enough. One more point that I saw in that same video, and it came up in several locations. A lot of it was early on in the video. And that's the concept that those who push a candidate like Donald Trump, or any other candidate really, are part of the now religion, which is politics in the church. And that those who are engaged in the now religion are, even if ignorantly, they're supporting Satan in the New World Order. Now, are you comfortable with that judgment? I mean, because basically here we're judging virtually the entirety of dispensationalism. I'm personally not comfortable with that. I don't think it's just. I don't think it's legitimate. We have an obligation to shine our testimony far and wide. And in the political arena is one of the places that we have an opportunity to do this. We are in the world, we're not of the world, but we should be rubbing shoulders with the whole world. And we should be salt and light as far as we can, as wide as we can, as bright as we can, as much as we can, with all the heart we can muster, with all the time and energy and strength we can muster until that trumpet blows. I'm just uncomfortable with the concept that pastors who encouraged people to vote for Trump are part of a satanic deception that's bringing politics into the church that's unwittingly promoting the New World Order. I don't think this is fair. Let's just assume for a moment, okay? As I said earlier, I myself am very wary of what's going on in America. I'm wary of what's going on with President-elect Trump. I'm wary of his associations, his platform, his trajectory, what the future potentially holds. But I don't believe myself that it's legit to regard people that voted for Trump as really promoting the New World Order. Um, if you look at the reasons that they said they were voting and take their reasons at face value, this just isn't legitimate. And let's just assume for a moment that I'm correct and that folks who think like me are correct. And folks, remember, this is just connecting dots. This is our discernment. There's no guarantee that we're correct. But let's assume we are. And let's assume that over the next 2 years, what gets rolling here in America very quickly over the next 2 years, it becomes obvious it's way more progressive politics than we expected when we voted for Trump. Let's just assume that. And let's assume that his religion is even way more progressive than we thought it might be. That it's really hardcore going down a NAR post-millennial path, but worse, with progressive morality mingled into it. In a strong version of ecumenism. And it comes to the point where real dispensationalists are basically told, you either have to be with us or you're against us. You have to be completely on board or we don't trust your patriotism. And it goes a direction where all of a sudden we realize we can't go there. Now what are we going to do? Well, folks, I honestly believe that you will hardly find a single dispensational pastor that's going to go down that path. Maybe some will. But dispensational pastors as a whole, and dispensational prophecy teachers as a whole, when push comes to shove, if that day comes, they're not the bride of American politics. They're the bride of Christ. They're going to make the right choice. If their discernment has been off, the pieces will come together and it'll be right. What this reminds me of is the post-tribbers who accuse the pre-tribbers. Oh, but what if you're wrong? I mean, if you believe in a pre-trib rapture and the pre-trib rapture doesn't happen, you're gonna follow the Antichrist and take the mark of the beast, because you're be thinking, oh, well, we're gonna go up in the pre-trib rapture, so this can't be the Antichrist. Really? No pre-tribulationist is going to follow. If the pre-trib rapture, I don't believe there's 1 in a million, billion, trillion chance that the pre-trib rapture is false, but let's just assume it is. The worst that's going to happen is we're going to hit a speed bump. We're going to go through 2 or 3 weeks where we make our adjustments and we say, okay, we were wrong. Let's get it together. Let's move on. And not one pre-tribulationist is going to give up if they're truly born again and take the mark of the beast and follow the Antichrist. You don't throw good money after bad. You don't throw your good interpretation after one bad interpretation. So in other words, if we figured out that we were wrong in the pre-trib rapture, we've got all this information on what the tribulation looks like, and what the Antichrist looks like. There's no way that we're going to go wrong there too. It's just not going to happen. Well, the same way when it comes to this whole issue of Christians on a pilgrim relationship with politics, being salt and light as long as we can, as hard as we can, and shedding that light as much as we can. And if all of a sudden we get told we have to conform or we're no longer welcome, and we have to conform to things that we think are completely wrong, this is no longer connecting the dots. This is being against Bible teaching. Well, guess what? Born again dispensational pastors and born again dispensational prophecy teachers are not going to give in. They're not going to cave in. There's no way under the sun. Why? Because they love the Word of God. They love the Christ of the Bible and the Bible of Christ. They're just not going to give in. So don't think that they're part of a satanic religion in the church. They're just not. They're being salt and light in the world like they're commanded to be. They might be manifesting in areas you're not comfortable manifesting in. That's okay. But none of us can manifest light everywhere. We all get our little areas where we're comfortable manifesting light, and we manifest that light. Anyway, I simply do not believe that pastors who encourage people to vote for Trump are promoting a satanic deception, and they're unwittingly promoting the New World Order. I just don't believe it. Now, I do want to point out that these points that we're looking at, this is not directly Bible teaching. There are differences in extra biblical discernment. Now, what do I mean by extra biblical discernment? Well, there's a whole bunch of areas that are really can be beneficial where people research. The New Age movement, Illuminati, the secret societies, Masons, the UFOs, possession experiences like demonic possession experiences, the history of the Nephilim, archaeology, the deep state, the global cabal. We could go on and list dozens of things. Creation, research, investigation. These are all areas of extra biblical discernment and extra biblical research. Now, obviously, the bulk of our teaching ought to be Bible teaching, what the Bible says, but all these other areas have their value. I love to listen to men like Billy Crone and L.A. Marzulli and others to bring a lot of light on some of these subjects. Tom Hughes' book on the mark of the beast was a fascinating read. And that was a lot of extra biblical research in there. But it does lend itself as a handmaiden or a servant to the message of the Bible. Now, these areas that we're talking about here when it comes to Trump and the election and our discernment and connecting the dots, we're talking about issues, basically 5 main issues where we connect the dots differently. This is discernment. It's not Bible teaching. So we have the whole idea of Trump's relationship to the New World Order and the ethics of Trump's New World Order ethics, or whatever we think they are. That's number one. The second one is what kind of benefits Trump's going to bring to America. This is a matter of connecting the dots and discernment. Then we have a third point, which is the integrity of elections. Do we have elections or selections? This is a matter of connecting the dots, folks. It's not thus saith the Lord. And we have the concept of pastors encouraging folks to vote for Trump. Now, on some levels, we have pastoral obligation here to teach the sheep and encourage the sheep. But some of this here is again, just a matter of connecting the dots and discernment. Now, some folks were really put off that pastors were encouraging and sometimes strongly encouraging folks to vote for Trump. Well, just try and step into their shoes for a few minutes. Now, again, I'm not trying to justify if you can think of 2 or 3 statements where people were just really over the top. That's fine. I'm not trying to justify that. But just let's step down from the frustration over the extremes. Let's step away from the outliers that you don't like. And let's just come to your average dispensational pastor, your average dispensational prophecy teacher, and how they handled the situation. And many of them, including myself, were encouraging folks to vote for Trump. I encouraged from the pulpit in 2 different conferences that people should vote for freedom. Don't vote for an unrealistic selection that has no chance of winning, and don't choose not to vote. Vote for the best solution we can get, because if we don't, and we get Kamala, we have 4 years of Marxism in America. And it could have been the death knell of evangelical freedom. But anyway, pastors were encouraging folks to vote for Trump. And why were they doing so? Well, step into their shoes. Try and think like they were thinking, just for a few minutes. If you honestly believed that the Democrats getting another 4 years could just bring wholesale abortion to America, could just completely destroy this country, destroy its economy, just steal more freedoms from us, pass laws that forbid the evangelicals from having 501c3 organizations, and start prosecuting 501c3s, whether churches or ministries. And if we see that coming down the pike, you understand why they were so serious about encouraging people to vote for Trump. Now, I personally don't know a single evangelical pastor. Well, let's just narrow it. Dispensational pastors. I don't know a single dispensational pastor or a single dispensational Bible teacher who wasn't wary about some things in Trump's platform, his associations, and his trajectory. Every one of them that I personally know was. They still passionately felt, that not only was it the best solution we had, that this was an escape from an immediate existential threat. In other words, what would you rather have? Let's say you live in the hills in California and you've got your nice house on a 10-acre spread surrounded by some woods and some sagebrush meadows and gorgeous views. Would you rather have a forest fire approaching you from 20 miles away, or a forest fire that's a quarter mile away, the wind's blowing 80 miles an hour, and it's racing right for your house, and you got 2 minutes to load up as whatever you can grab out of your house, throw it in your car, and get lickety-split out of there? Now, which would you rather have? This is how dispensational pastors and prophecy teachers were regarding this election. Now, you might disagree with that. And if you do, okay. I mean, that's how I felt. That's how the vast majority felt. I think you at least need to enter into that. I think the parallel is very apt. Now, we're not saying there isn't a forest fire still approaching us, but I would rather have a forest fire that's 20 miles away approaching me at a good clip than a forest fire a quarter mile away and approaching at a good clip. So anyway, we're going into these discernment issues. We have Trump's relationship to the New World Order, Trump's benefits or non-benefits to America, the integrity of elections, whether we have elections or selections, pastors encouraging people to vote for Trump, and then even the whole idea of whether we vote or not. I mean, I spent years coming from a mentality that Christians shouldn't vote because we're not of the world. We're pilgrims passing through. If you don't have citizenship, you don't vote. It took me a while to get a more balanced view of the Christian perspective that has more Bible in it and less hyper spirituality. And Paul, well, his main impetus in life was his heavenly citizenship. He didn't reject using his Roman citizenship where there was a time and a place for it. He pleaded his Roman citizenship. He used his Roman citizenship. And we as Christians, our first loyalty is to our heavenly citizenship. But we are American citizens. And if you're Canadian, you're Canadian citizens. If you're from Ireland, you're Irish citizens. If you're from the Netherlands, you're Dutch citizens. And you see where I'm going. There's obligations that are involved in that, and there's some loyalties that are involved in that. But you come to decide, should we vote or should we not vote? Well, I felt like we shouldn't vote. Now, I do feel, well, I'm not going to hold it over someone's head and say you're sinning if you're not voting. I will hold it over your head in this sense that I think it's a lack of Christian wisdom and really a lack of discernment to look at where we were at. But, ultimately, you don't answer to me. Ultimately, you answer to the Lord. So we just process this. This is just a matter of pragmatic wisdom as far as I'm concerned. All of these points that we just mentioned, like Trump's relationship to America and benefits or lack of benefits and his relationship to the New World Order, folks, this is connecting dots. This is not Bible teaching. This is connecting dots in discernment. And I already told you that I have my reservations. Now, there's a broad spectrum in the dispensationals camp. Some of my dearest brothers, they honestly believe. I don't think they're 100% committed to it. In fact, I don't think anyone could be, but they're strongly inclined to believe that Trump is a real threat to the New World Order and that he's a wild card. They don't know how to handle him, and we get a breath of fresh air. And some of us don't think that's right. We think that he's maybe replacing the hard left Marxist version of the New World Order with an American first or West first version of centrist version of the New World Order. But folks, both of these positions are connecting the dots. It's discernment. Let's assume that they prove to be right. Am I holding my position humbly enough that if the New World Order folks go after President-elect Trump and take him out because he's seriously hindering what they want to do, can we say, okay, I connected the dots wrong? But I also believe that they're humble enough that if a couple years go by and my hunches start proving to be true, they're going to say, oh, I guess those brothers, they were right, and we saw it a little bit wrong. But this is connecting the dots, friends. This is discernment. This is not Bible teaching. We should not candle or judge anyone's commitment to Christ, anyone's commitment to the faith, anyone's godliness or character on the basis of which of these views or any other view they hold. It's a spectrum of views. Some of the best, godliest dispensational pastors and teachers in America seem to honestly believe that Trump is a wild card and he's a threat to the New World Order. So what if they believe that? So what if their discernment is different than mine? Some of us think that he's going to replace or appears to be part of a process of replacing a more extreme leftist version of the New World Order with a more centrist version. So what if we're right? Ultimately, right now we're connecting dots. There's not as many dots that we have. We don't have enough dots that we can say for absolute certain that we're right. I'd be pretty nervous if someone says, I'm absolutely certain I'm right on this point, no matter what their position was. We've seen a lot of things happen the last few years where we were thrown curveballs in our discernment or our perspective of where things were going. It just wasn't right on the money. That's okay. When it comes to stuff like this, we have a moral obligation to do some dot connecting and to hold it, but hold it loosely enough that if you get a few more dots in the picture and the picture looks different, you're willing to adjust your beliefs. At any rate, I don't want to beat this one any longer. Just if you see that this is dot connecting and it's not standing on Bible teaching, just hold it loosely and don't judge other people's godliness by whether they agree with our dot connecting or not. Yeah, that's problematic. So when it comes to looking at other believers and how they're responding to the President-elect Trump and how they interact with the political apparatus and what their views of Trump are, look in their views on why and how they vote. If you've got a few options available that range from painting them fairly black to painting them less black to maybe thinking that they have some legitimate motives for what they do, pick the option. Pick the option that puts them in the best light. Don't go for the darkness unless you're absolutely forced to. Try and think the best thoughts you can of your fellow believers. If you have the option to think someone is mistaken rather than intentionally malicious, well, then think so. If you have the option to think that they just don't have enough time and experience under their belt rather than to think they're intentionally teaching error, then think that. We just need to have a little bit of graciousness in this. I want to run through some of this Trump stuff just one more time, just a little bit of a review. Let's assume for a moment that those who think like me are correct, that Trump is introducing an America first centrist version of the New World Order, and it looks really cool that he's smashing the leftist Marxist version, and people are so glad Trump is trashing the New World Order when he's really sneakily bringing in a different version of it. And if he's he's part of the process of bringing this stuff in. So does this mean that those who think Trump is slowing or smashing the New World Order, does this mean that they're supporting the Antichrist, that they're supporting the New World Order? I don't think so. I just don't think that's legitimate. I don't think that's fair. Now, we might wish that they had a little bit better discernment. But again, this is connecting the dots. I'm perfectly willing, I'm just as willing to say I could be wrong on my discernment. Maybe Trump is smashing it, as I am willing to say I think I'm right and that he's a subtle version. So we want to be careful that we're not harshly judging our brethren on these matters. This is not crystal clear Bible teaching. This is connecting the dots. And none of us are as good at connecting the dots as we think we are. All we have to do is look at the last 20 years of our dot connecting, and we realize, well, okay, I got a decent batting average. I'll probably be in Major League Baseball one more year, but I'm not going to be in the Hall of Fame. So we just want to be careful, folks, in our discernment, in our criticism of other people's faith and devotion. I do want to give you one more thought. What if those like myself, who think that we see an America first, West first version of the New World Order that's of a deceptive, centrist version being established, and we see stuff that says, "Oh, the dots connect, man. This is the best solution." Okay, but what if the New World Order really does want to go down a path that's more hard leaning to the left? And this is the smoke screen or the delusion. See what I'm saying? We want to be careful that we don't get married to our connecting of the dots. Connect them, but be open to more dots, because more dots are coming, folks. More dots are coming. We're going to start getting a hailstone of dots to connect. And eventually it will probably become clear enough what's going on that we'll all be on the same page by the time the rapture happens. But maybe it won't. Maybe we're not going to all be on the same page until we're all sitting in Emmaus Road 101 the couple weeks after the rapture and realizing that none of us had as much discernment as we thought we had when it comes to stuff like this. I mean, just thinking about the future. This is maybe a long shot, but it's being discussed. What if the Insurrection Act is invoked between now and January 20th? What if a bunch of big shots in the Pentagon and the military and the three-letter agencies and a bunch of political figures get together and invoke the Insurrection Act, and President-elect Trump is banned from being president, and the Supreme Court upholds it in an emergency hearing. Um, I think it's a long shot, but it's not impossible. And so then all of my discernment and all of a bunch of other people's discernment that Trump, we connect the dots and we think that this is the Hegelian synthesis here in America, America first, centrist version, and it gets exploded. So I like connecting the dots. Most of you like connecting the dots, but we need to hold our dot connecting with loose hands, folks. It's not crystal clear Bible teaching. It's just dot connecting. It's discernment. And we are wrong way more often than we like to admit. So let me give you some closing thoughts here. One of the biggest problems that we have in prophecy and discernment circles is simply lack of critical thinking. Someone will publish a video with some provocative or outlandish or sensational claims, and it runs really well, does really well, and people are wowed and amazed, and that's seen as okay. People don't seem to have much of a problem with provocative teachings and with outlandish teachings and with sensational claims, and they just, it comes and that's okay. And the people say, I'm just sharing thoughts, I'm just thinking out loud. But if somebody responds to these provocative videos or these outlandish videos or these sensational claims with some serious substance and some serious arguments, with a reasoned response that exposes faulty reasoning and the selective use of evidence and wild leaps of logic and sloppy math and painting with the broad brush and making claims about other people that are just not, they're not right. Well, then the person that does the expose is regularly accused of being unloving and critical and harsh and mean. But, well, folks, whatever happened to critical thinking? Whatever happened to iron sharpens iron? If you allow sensational or provocative or outlandish videos to come out and then get frustrated when someone does a video to expose the problems, you are saying that you don't like iron sharpens iron. You don't want to play in a sandbox where iron sharpens iron is the rule of the day. You just want to have a nice, safe place sandbox where you're okay, I'm okay, my opinion's cool, your opinion's cool. We're not capable of knowing anything with any degree of certainty anyway. And we just don't like it when things are exposed as being not true. Well, folks, I don't know. If you can live in that sandbox, that's between you and the Lord. I just can't live there. I like iron sharpens iron. Now, I don't necessarily like iron sharpens iron when people want to direct that against things that I believe, but it's part of the process. We have to live with it. We have to accept it. And I've had some very profitable iron sharpens iron from some of my brothers in the Lord. Monro Gonzalez is a classic example. He's probably sharpened me more in the last few years than any man on the planet. Yeah, he's a brother of the Word. He's strong in the Word, and he's got a lot of wisdom and discernment. But at any rate, we want to play in the sandbox of iron sharpens iron. We want critical thinking. Don't go down the path of rejecting critical thinking and just wanting to have live in this little world where people are free to float all kinds of sensational theories and it's wrong to shoot them down. We don't, at least I don't want to be there. Hopefully you don't want to be there. Now, anyway, one last thought. I feel that some of the videos that I watched were making blanket judgments that if you take what was said consistently and just were literal with it, the blanket judgments applied to virtually the entire cadre of dispensational pastors and dispensational Bible teachers and dispensationalists in general. And I felt that those blanket statements or those blanket principles were wrong. But I also noticed in the videos that I watched that in the chat room, people were naming names very clearly, many, many names that I respect, many names that you would recognize and respect, were named as people that were compromised and not worth following and were sold out to compromise, and some hard things were said against them. Well, I own all of conservative contending evangelicalism of the dispensational stamp as my family. These are my comrades in arms. This is my family. And I'm offended when I see that kind of blanket judgment against my family. I don't think it's right. I think it's harsh. And I'm going to come to the defense of my family. We don't always agree on every point in this dispensational family, but this is the ground I'm on. And some of let me just put it this way, folks. I've just come to the point where when I hear discernment ministry, I start to cringe. It never used to be this way for me. I used to follow a lot of discernment ministries, but here's my position. If people are consistent conservative evangelicals and they are dispensational, I own them. I won't say that I don't have any interest at all in Calvinism, Arminianism, and provisionism. I have my positions on that. And I have positions on Pentecostalism and non-Pentecostalism, cessationism and non-cessationism. But some of these discernment ministries, they go hard, really hard after people because they're Pentecostal or because they're non-cessationist, or because they're Calvinist or because they're Arminian. And I'm just not there, folks. I have my opinions and views on those things. But I'm looking at what makes a person an evangelical and what makes them dispensational. Those are the issues I'm going to fight over. Those other ones I'm not going to fight over. If you want to talk about it, I'm willing to talk, but I'm not going to fight over them. And that's just where I'm at. And so that bottom concept, the evangelical and dispensational, that's my family. And if I feel my family is being attacked, I'm going to come up and defend them. And that's just the way I'm going to roll. That's the way I roll. At any rate, I've started to ramble, so I'll just leave it there. Hopefully we got some questions coming up. I took note of a few questions I saw earlier, so that if they get missed out of the chat, I did write a few down, so we'll go on to that. We're going to end right here. We've gone for an hour and a half, and we'll move into the Q&A. So let me pull down my notes and pull up some Q&A stuff here. All right. I guess we'll have questions here in a minute or so. I'll check again in a minute or two, but I see a lot of my friends out there. I see Aldo and Sir Pierce and Scotty Hines and Hermie Elf and a lot of good friends. I see names I recognize like Just Vicky, Nick Spencer. I'm glad you folks all showed up. It's Pookie and Hannelore. Yes, I thank you folks for showing up. I didn't really want to talk on this subject, but I felt an obligation to. If we don't work through and process through this stuff, it's going to be even a bigger problem down the road. I'm going to check my email again, see if questions have come in yet. Let me double check and make sure I got my emails in the right order too. Yeah, I got my emails lined up, so it might just be just another minute. Could be the slow internet too. Every once in a while, especially when I'm on the road and I don't have my hardwired internet at home, emails sometimes take a minute or two longer than they do when I'm at home. Well, I see Vindog in here now, and the people are saying Pete's in here, so I didn't see Pete. Oh, there he is, Rev 310. Hi, Pete. Good to see you in, Mr. Pocket Full of Steel. All right. Do I have questions coming? I would assume I do. Oh, sent an email, Lee. Okay, thanks, Hannelore. It's just taking its sweet time. It'll show up sooner or later. Well, we had some interesting, sent twice. Wow. Yeah, I'm going to blame it on technology. It's not your fault, Hannelore. That happens sometimes. I remember a few months back, you sent it 3 or 4 times and it took like 10 minutes to show up. But in the meantime, we can just make do and just roll with the show here. What's a prescribed rapture? I've never heard a prescribed rapture. Do you mean a pre-trib rapture or something else? All right, let me check my emails once more. Wowzers. Still not showed up. Well, here's a good question. Someone asked, since Lee officially removed his endorsement of Zach in such a public fashion, where was the endorsement of the same? It was in my YouTube chat, my YouTube comment section. I put the removal of the endorsement in the same place I put the endorsement. And folks, if you feel like you can still watch Zach yourself, that's between you and the Lord. I'm just uncomfortable with statements that in my mind are a blanket judgment of the vast majority of dispensationalism, but he has some really good material there. If you're comfortable going through that and spitting out the bones, that's between you and the Lord. I'm just uncomfortable with what I feel is an unjust treatment of dispensational pastors, an unjust judgment of their character. I'm uncomfortable with that. Good point. Paul and Barnabas had issues, but they were both saved. That's a very good point. All right, let's see if these emails show up. Wow. Maybe we can try a different email address, Hannelore. Why don't you send them to my lwbrain@gmail address and see if they show up there. lwbrain. Oh, sent a third time already. Okay. Try the LW Brain email. See if that one works better. All right. This is, well, maybe a few of you can just pray that the Lord would break through here for us. We have obviously some interference on the electromagnetic spectrum, and our email is getting held up. Well, here's a question I can answer while we're waiting for the email. When did Mondo team up with Jonathan Cahn? That's actually more of a Prophecy Watchers in general thing than a Mondo thing. Prophecy Watchers' position, and I can't speak authoritatively for them, this is just my observation, but their perspective on prophecy is they are not going to have things on only things on their show that they can endorse on every point. Absolutely, they'll allow things on their show where they feel that um, people have some valid things that are worth sharing that are mixed with some things that they don't necessarily agree with, but they just want to present this broader footprint because they love the entire dispensational camp, and they just want to have that broader footprint out there in the mix of, like, um, there's some things myself in Jonathan's Cahn's ministry that I'm just not into the blood moons. It just makes no sense to me. But there are other things on prophetic insight, connecting the dots, seeing patterns in history. He's got some brilliant insights. So when you deal with people like Jonathan Cahn, there's some things you're going to really enjoy and some other things you're just not going to enjoy. All right, let's check my two email addresses one more time. Okay, still didn't show up to the first email address. And we still don't have any emails showing up. This might be a record, Hannelore. I think this might be the longest time we've ever had. Yeah, you're right, Pookie. John Hagee and some other Bible teachers did teach the blood moon stuff. And I don't think, personally, I'm very skeptical of things like blood moons and, making a big deal out of eclipses and stuff like that. But and I think that there are some personalities that are a little bit given more to the sensational side of Bible prophecy like that. But some of those same people that are more given to their sensationalism, they got other areas where they're really solid and they bless a lot of people. Okay, check my junk folder. That's a good. Oh, here we go. They finally came through on my LW brain. Here we go. All right. Thank you, folks, for being patient. Question: why is Trump being held to holy standards? That's a serious question. No, I agree. Um, we shouldn't be holding one of our presidential candidates to some rock solid evangelical dispensational understanding of things. I don't think they're capable of it. Um, we should hold them to the traditional morality of America, and we should encourage them to get more like it. And you're right, we've had some very, very sketchy choices lately in the last few election cycles. Uh, wouldn't it be ironic if the rapture happened sometime during Trump's last term, since the Bible says that that's the last Trump? Any thoughts if this actually happens? Well, if those who hold the 6,000 year theory and they're measuring from AD 32, AD 33 are correct up to the start of the kingdom, and you back up 7 years and then you have a short window and before that you got the rapture, well, we could see the rapture at the last Trump happen during the last Trump term. It could well happen that way, and God does have a sense of humor. Do you think Trump intentionally allows Christian freedom to gain our votes? I don't think so. I think Trump, this is just my opinion, and I could be wrong, but I think he is really trying to hold a centrist position. I think he's trying to hold a position that's good for Americans as he finds them. That's not necessarily, in fact, I know it's not the same thing as holding a position that's good for Bible truth as it's found in the Bible. He wants to see Christians so that they're not harried by the hard Marxist left and they have freedom. But he also wants people that want a lifestyle that we're uncomfortable with. He wants them to have freedom too. He wants both sides to have freedom. He doesn't want either side to be able to pass legislation that restricts the freedoms of the other side. Now, that's not necessarily easy to balance, but that's what he's trying to do. Now, we could see things change in the future where that shifts in ways that we're uncomfortable with, but that's what it looks like right now. Moses lived for 120 years, but high priest Jehoiada lived to be 130 years. Why do you think he was able to live past 120? Well, because when the Bible says that man has yet 120, I don't think it's talking about that's the longest age that man gets to live. Anyway, that's just my thought. Lee, in past videos, you said the rapture could be maybe 2025 or 2026. Do you still think that? I do. I personally believe that the 6,000 year theory is going to prove to be exact. It won't be one day off or one day long, one day short. But here's the difficulty. I also sincerely believe that we might miss something that belongs in the equation. There's some interesting little quirks when you study Old Testament chronology. There's some interesting little quirks on how you deal with the like, for instance, the times of the judges when they're in captivity, when they're not in captivity. We might have something similar to that belongs in our figuring. We also, our calendar could be off a couple of years. We wouldn't know it. We could think that we are in the year 2024, and in God's mind, we're in 2021. So our rapture date that we think is going to be the rapture date could come, and we blow through it. We go 2 years past it, and we're, well, what in the world happened? Well, I'm not going to get all shaken up if that happens, because I am convinced that we could miss something that belongs to the equation, that we could easily have a calendar that's off a couple of years. We wouldn't know it. So I'm not going to be worried if that happens. Prophetic convergence will still be red hot. Will be probably about melting down. And the rapture is definitely going to happen, and it'll happen right on time. If we blow past our dates, it's because there's mistakes in our calendar, not because there's mistakes in God's. What is your opinion about a pastor who says you can't come to church without the vaccine? Well, the man's probably operating by his conscience. He probably needs to get Windows reinstalled and get some sound information installed on the hard drive. And if I was in that situation, I would just go find a different church. I think he's wrong, but we want to be careful that we don't trample on consciences when we take a position on things like that. What can we do to defeat the doctrinal prejudice that blinds us from biblical truth? Well, the main thing you can do is really be a student of the Word. Be more a student of the Word than you are a student of your favorite Bible teachers and schools of thought. And let the Bible interpret the Bible. Be a person who wants to have biblical theology, that is, theology based on the plain statements of Scripture, interpreted by the plain statements of Scripture. We go astray when we have theological theology. That's when we have a proof text from the Bible, which is informed by theological presuppositions presuppositions which the plain statements of Scripture would overthrow. Now, I do have a 2-video series I'm working on right now on doctrinal discernment, on spiritual warfare, on the discernment aspect of it. I hope to be having one out in the next week and another one the following week. We'll see if I get enough time to edit them when I'm on the road. I put a lot of time into them. I made some really cool slides. I'm not sure what this question is. Maybe the person who asked it can resend it? Regarding controversy and faction, have you heard that the kingdom, and then I don't have the rest of the question. So I'm not really sure what the question is. Why is God going to destroy all animals on land, air, and water? According to Zephaniah 1:2-3, what did they ever do to deserve such a fate? Nature itself is given to be a blessing to man. It's not an end in and of itself. God does not have personal relationships with animals like he has with human beings. Animals, it plainly states in the New Testament, were made to be taken and used. They're made to be taken and consumed. That's their purpose. Whether we use them as pets, whether we use them as food, whether we use them for farm animals to pull a plow, they're given to man as tools. They're dispensable. And I don't know that we should even be asking a question of what did they do to deserve such a fate. They perished in the flood, and they're going to perish at the second coming again. That's God's prerogative. Well, this is an interesting question, and I think it's a good one. How can God allow sacrifices in the third temple in the tribulation if Christ made both the temple and sacrifices obsolete? Well, this is an interesting question. Let me put this from a little bit different angle. In view of the fact that Christ has been crucified from eternity past in the mind of God, and that from the very beginning of God's redemption communications with mankind in the garden, we had a promise of the seed of the woman. And it wasn't very long into the book of Genesis before we see the typology with Abraham and his son Isaac, that God is going to provide the sacrifice. So Christ has been crucified from eternity past in the mind of God. So why would there even ever be a temple in the first place? And the sacrifices? Because, as we read in Galatians, the law is a schoolmaster. It's designed to teach men to point to the work of Christ. In the tribulation and in the kingdom, but we'll just deal with the tribulation right now, the temple sacrifices, for those whose eyes are open to the truth of the Word of God, are pointing backwards as a memorial to the Christ who died on the cross. Just like the sacrifices in the temple in the Old Testament pointed forwards to the death of the Messiah. In the tribulation, the law is doing exactly what God designed it to do. It's not an end in and of itself. It's a schoolmaster, and it will do its job exceptionally well in the tribulation. But that's going to be hindered because men are going to be influenced by a rabbinical understanding of the Old Testament, which loses to a large degree the truth that God was intending to convey with those sacrifices in the Old Testament teaching. And this is why God sends Moses and Elijah. So it's going to be Moses and Elijah versus the rabbis, and that's going to be a battle for the ages. Well, can you expound on the binding and loosing passage of Scripture? Yeah. Whatsoever is bound on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever is loosed on earth shall be loosed in heaven. I don't think that this is saying that we have the authority, at least not as a general principle. that we can get together and pray and we can bind $1 million or loose $1 million, or bind the Prince of Persia or loose the Prince of Persia. But it does hold fast as a consistent principle. If the local church binds a man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh in church discipline, God will honor that. And if through the gospel people is loosed from the chains of the devil by the gospel, God will honor that. This is the general sense, the foundation sense of binding and loosing, of salvation and discipline. And if you can get those two ideas deeply entrenched as the concept that's being communicated, then from there you'll see that it has a few other applications. Oh, here's one that I had already taken down, and this is a good one. What does 1 Peter 2:8 mean? They stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to do so. I love this question because I love to answer this question. They're not destined, they're not predestined to disobey the word. They're predestined or destined to stumble if they disobey the word. The way God has arranged this moral world that we live in, and the way that he's arranged the message of the Bible, both the gospel message and the discipleship and teaching that goes around it, God's designed this message so that if a person intentionally strays, disobeys from the known word of God, whether it's as a believer straying from the teachings on what's expected of a disciple, or whether it's from the unbeliever in the world straying from what's known, the known demand of the gospel. When men intentionally stray from that, it costs them and they stumble, and there's a price to pay. Okay, we got some more questions. Oh, yeah, we got a few more here. Okay, Lee, can you speak to the issue of assuming Christians are supporting New Age by listening to music by any current Christian artists? This is a topic that has been hammered also. Great question. When we're dealing with music, we're dealing with general principles of discernment. Sometimes people try and present music with this very cut and dried scientific way, and it basically boils down to you're allowed to have these certain styles of music and not these other styles. And if you have this certain kind of beat, you can have it. If it's got a syncopated beat, you can't have it. If it was a hymn written before the 1950s and it was written from the John W. Peterson era or earlier, you can have it. If it's written after, you can't. And they got all these, cut and dried rules that they try and follow to try and keep the bad music out. Well, you might keep a bunch of bad modern music out, but sometimes you allow some garbage hymns. And they're not just garbage with their music. Sometimes they're garbage in their wording and their doctrine. So when we come to the modern music, personally, when I look at what's out there, I think some of the modern music is really good in its words and it's really good in its music. And it reaches the hearts of people that are a little harder to reach with most of the hymns. Some of the better hymns will still reach them. But some of the hymns are either way too tame or way too boring. Now, and that's just musical preference, folks. This is not right and wrong. Now, the modern music industry in the church, it's deeply influenced by secular music, and it's deeply influenced by the New Age movement and some other movements that are not that spiritually healthy. And this is going to come into the music industry. It's going to come into the music, and it can influence you when you listen to some of that music. So here's the standard that I use for music. This isn't the only standard, but this is my fundamental standard. If the music you're listening to is actually promoting biblical Christianity, where it's promoting you to have a hunger for the word and a hunger for fellowship with the strongest kind of believers, not the wishy-washiest, worldliest believers. And if it's leading you to be more faithful to the scriptures and to hunger for more holiness and to hunger for more separation from the world, then I'm not going to complain about your music, even if it's some stuff that to me that sounds like two cats fighting in a garbage can. If that's helping you, that's between you and God. But that's not my choice. But that said, the music you listen to can have subtle influences that you don't necessarily notice. Let me just give you an illustration. I like country music, folks, and some of it I love. But I have noticed if I sit down and listen like I'm driving in a car and I need to hear something because I'm getting tired, and I turn country music on. I listen to country music for an hour. It influences me, and I start sensing frustrations and angers and sorrows that I wouldn't normally have. And I notice a similar thing when I listen to rock and roll music. So it's not merely the music and the words. There seems to be a spiritual element that's attached to the music, and that the spirits are working with the words and with the music. So hopefully that helps. This is an interesting question, and I can appreciate the question. Why is it so necessary to publicly disassociate with the brother? If this was simply that we differed on a point of secondary doctrine or even dispensationalism, let's say it was pre-wrath, I wouldn't disassociate with someone over points like that unless they were mean-spirited. I took the stand I did, and I hope people can hear this clearly. I took the stand I did despite the fact that I liked the brother. I took the stand I did because he made blanket judgments against dispensational pastors and dispensational Bible teachers in general, that if you take what he said and you apply it literally and consistently, the vast majority of dispensational pastors and the vast majority of dispensational Bible teachers, prophecy teachers, are engaged in this satanic religion that's come into the church, the new religion, and they are, even if ignorantly, they are promoting a deception. They're promoting the New World Order. And I absolutely believe that's wrong. I believe that blanket judgment is wrong. Now, beyond that's worse. In his chat rooms, he and his moderators have allowed people to say, libel men like Jack Hibbs, Mondo Gonzalez, Billy Crone, Tom Hughes, Brennan Holthouse, Jan Markell, Andy Woods, a whole number of preachers, men and women of God. And people in those chat rooms say some pretty mean things about him, regard him as not worth following, regard him as compromised. I think this is wrong. I think that's very wrong. And so that's why I have publicly disassociated myself from his ministry. I will not apologize for that. I would feel wrong if I didn't. I was unaware that this was going on. When it was pointed out to me, I was completely grieved. And I wrote 2 private letters to the brother to encourage him to moderate his views, back down a little bit. And he publicly, without naming me, publicly replied in a video mentioning the wording I used in my letter, and basically told me to take a hike, and that anyone that thought like me was messed up and deceived. So that's why I've disassociated myself from him. If you want to associate with that, that's between you and the Lord. I'm not going to, because anybody that accuses my fellow comrades in arms, whether the dispensational pastors or the dispensational prophecy teachers or dispensationalists in general, accuses them of those kind of things, I have an issue. You challenge my family, you challenge me. You accuse my family, you accuse me. And I'm perfectly willing on this to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give account for this. Maybe I'll be found wrong on maybe not having a good enough attitude about it, but I don't believe for a moment that I'll be found wrong for standing on the ground that I stood on. Okay, we are done with all the questions. Oh, okay, here's KG's reiterated the music question. Lee, I think what they're talking about is where the music came from. If this is a good question, folks. And now this isn't always easy to implement, but I'm looking for music that comes out of the most spiritual corners of the church. That's just a principle for me. If music is coming out of the most worldly, most carnal, most compromised quarter of the church, then I'm just not that interested. That's just a principle for me. I know that just talking to people that are in the music industry, and I've met a couple over the years, there are problems in some corners of the Christian music industry. People struggle with stuff they shouldn't be struggling with. They've got compromises they shouldn't compromise with. And I personally don't think that we should be intentionally emulating the cutting edge, most popular versions of the world's music. Anyway, if that's what you're talking about, sources, that's what I would say. Okay, here's another question. Can I weigh in on the Alan Didio controversy? And there's preachers that have associated with him other than just myself. And here's my position. If you can enter into this is great. If you can't, well, that's between you and the Lord. But I decided years ago that the issues I was going to divide on were going to be, I've got a triangle in my mind. The bottom layer is the doctrines that make a person an evangelical. The second layer is what makes him dispensational. The third layer is the whole issue of Calvinism versus Arminianism versus provisionism. And on that same third level is whether you're Pentecostal or not Pentecostal, whether you're cessationist or non-cessationist or any mixture thereof. And then the top level is just church polity and church structure. You know, how you do baptism, the Lord's table, whether you got one pastor or a plurality of pastors, whether you got a plurality of equal pastors or you got a senior pastor with associate pastors, all those kind of questions. So the bottom layer, to me, that's war. I am going to stand without compromise for the fundamental doctrines of the faith, for the things that make a person an evangelical. And if any compromise on that layer that comes across my path, I'm going to deal with it. Now, on the dispensational layer, that's the only other layer that I really am going to fight over. Now, I have opinions on the other stuff, and I'm willing to share them. But so that the third layer, whether a person's Calvinist or Arminian, I have my preferences. But I'm not going to break fellowship with someone because they're Calvinist or they're Arminian. And I don't break fellowship with people merely because they're Pentecostal or non-Pentecostal, because they're cessationist or non-cessationist. I've got my opinions on it. So when it comes to a brother like Alan Didio, he's obviously a Pentecostal, and I'm not Pentecostal. But I appreciate his zeal and his devotion for the gospel. I appreciate his stand for dispensationalism. And yes, there's going to be a few questions where if you're Pentecostal, you deal with it a little bit different than the non-Pentecostals. Are they worthy of a good conversation? Absolutely. Are they worthy of regarding someone as a non-Christian or a heretic or delusionary in and of themselves? No, I don't think so. And I won't go there. Now, obviously, in the Pentecostal camp, there are some extremes that make me extremely uncomfortable. And those extremes I will not touch with a 10-foot pole, like the New Apostolic Reformation. However, if I know a Christian who's got two friends that are New Apostolic Reformation and he's not, I'm not going to separate from him simply because he doesn't separate from his friends. I'm just not into that secondary separation thing. So hopefully that helps you understand that question. I've got many dear friends that are Pentecostal. I've preached in Pentecostal churches, and I've met many dear believers in Pentecostal churches. And I'm not going to separate with people because they're Pentecostal. All right. I'm going to check my email one more time, just make sure there's no more questions sent in. And I'll scroll here really quick and through the last few minutes of notes and see if our chats and see if there's anything. Well, here's an interesting thought. I'm just looking at some of the comments here. Now the fellowship has been broken right now with Zach and I, but I do want to make sure you understand. I love Zach. I think he has lots of potential. I think he's just showing some immaturity and lack of discernment. I would love to see him restored to some of the brothers that fellowship has been broken with. And I honestly don't believe that we have broken fellowship with him so much as just realized that the things that he was saying were breaking fellowship with us, because they were accusing us of things we're not guilty of, and that we're not comfortable owning that we're guilty of those things. The brother has a lot of potential, and the best thing you can do for him is to pray for him. And if some of you are still communicating with him and the Lord has you in a relationship with him where maybe you can do him some good, maybe you can do him some good. I'm not here beating the war drum and saying that you all have to walk away from Zach. I hope you don't think I'm doing that. But I feel, this is just my opinion, this is my discernment, I'm uncomfortable with the situation where he made blanket statements that if you take them literal at face value, there are really some hard charges against dispensationalists in general and dispensational pastors and Bible teachers. And all right, folks. We had a lot of questions. Okay, here's one more. It's a legit question. What's Zach's issue with people like Andy Woods, Brandon Holthouse, and Tom Hughes? Well, to try and understand Zach, he's coming from the position that there's no elections, there's only selections. That's part of the issue that's going on. That enters into this approach to the subject. He's very uncomfortable when pastors were encouraging people to vote for Trump. He doesn't like this idea that it's legit to vote for the lesser of two evils. He's very uncomfortable with that. And he's strongly convinced that Trump is part of a process of bringing in the New World Order, of an America First centrist version of the New World Order. And I have a lot of agreement with him on that. But some of these brothers he's mad at, they encourage people that they had an obligation to vote for Trump, that they shouldn't squander their vote on an ideal candidate who's got zero chance of winning, and they shouldn't squander the vote by not voting. They felt like there's an existential threat to America, and we would much rather have Trump in than Kamala. And that's, and if some of you that know Zach really well feel like I've missed a little bit here, feel free to shoot me an email or something. But listen to Zach's videos. That's what I understand his issue is. I understand the position, and I think he's wrong. And these men understood that, and they think he's wrong. All right, folks. It is now 10:07. We've been running for 2 hours strong. I want to thank you for hanging with me. It's always a joy to visit with some of you folks. May the Lord bless you. Keep going forwards. Keep looking up. Stay in the Word. Stay in prayer. And as we go forwards in the days ahead, just bear in mind, we're going to see more and more opportunities for chaos and division in the church. And let's just try and stay balanced. Let's, as much as we can, try and be gentle, try and be some gentle, loving, iron sharpens iron. Let's try and avoid going to extremes. You know, let me close with, give you a little story about myself for a closing thought. As a young believer, extremely zealous, and I was always gravitating in a direction of, I'm looking for the perfect church. I'm looking for the ideal church. I'm looking for that one group of believers, that one testimony on earth that the Lord owns, that's the one that's right, and all the rest are compromised. And I blew through the Plymouth Brethren and the Independent Baptists and different flavors of the Baptists and the Mennonites and different flavors of the Mennonites and the Anabaptists and different flavors of the Pentecostals. And every group I went to, I saw things that were noble and God honoring. But I never found any particular group that stood out as like, this is the one that's best above everybody else. And later on years, I got introduced to Calvary Chapels, many outstanding things there. But slowly over the decades, I evolved away from this mentality that I want to be standing with that one small true testimony that's right and all the other people are wrong. In other words, I wanted to find this testimony that's way up here on standing on the pedestal or the hill or the mountaintop of righteousness, and all the rest of the churches are down here in carnal Christianity land. And I wanted to find that church, and I finally gave up. They don't exist. I have come to the point, Christians, where I regard myself as a plain, vanilla, conservative evangelical. And all the other labels, I won't say they have no value, but that's what I identify with. I'm happy fellowshipping with Baptists. I'm happy fellowshipping with Anabaptists. I'm happy fellowshipping with charismatics and Pentecostals, as long as they're consistent evangelicals and they're dispensational. I can have happy fellowship with them. All the other points in my mind, I won't say they're unimportant, but they're secondary. And I just want to be able to have happy fellowship with believers that are going to be in heaven with me. I don't want to get up there and find out that I was at odds with somebody that I shouldn't have been at odds with. Yeah, here's a remark. I still listen to Pete Garcia and J.B. Hickson, and I agree. I absolutely agree. Um, there, there's a lot of diversity of opinion out there. There's a lot of wisdom in a lot of brothers, and we're not going to agree with them on every point. But they have their own God-given skill set, their own God-given ministry, their own God-given set of wisdom. And I regard Pete Garcia and J.B. Hickson as two of my closest friends on earth. And um, that's just the way the body rolls. That's just the way the body works. Well, anyway, folks, I rambled on a little bit longer. I'm gonna leave you now. I got to go to bed. We got a big day tomorrow, heading for the family reunion. So take care, y'all. Adios. We'll see you around. Keep looking up. God bless.